I'm Nicole Wiedemann. I'm an associate professor at the School of Architecture, and I'm here with our lecturers today, Lucy Begg and Robert Gay. They are co-directors and co-founders of Thoughtbarn, which was established in 2007 and is based in Austin, Texas. Thoughtbarn is a critical practice that moves across disciplines in order to test and question the agency of architecture. I have a few questions.
Oh, good.
Is there a defining moment in your lives that helped to position you as the architects you are today?
I think it happened to me when I was around my second job. I quit. I kind of quit my job, to be totally honest, and I refocused my architecture career. I felt like the path that I was on from undergrad, I wanted to reposition myself within the profession. So I kind of moved out to West Alabama, moved into a garage, and spent all my savings and pretty much pottered around and took photos of architecture projects, hung out with a great friend of mine who was teaching at the Rural Studio at that time. And I think that really helped me kind of redirect how I wanted to position myself, think about kind of the future of kind of architectural practice. And that kind of led me to, reinvestigate going back to grad school, which eventually led me here to the University of Texas. And then the University of Texas enabled me to kind of do what I'm doing today. So I think, in a nutshell, I think that was a good redirection for me. So.
Mm-hmm.
I think Robbie and I met at the Rural Studio, so prior to doing grad school. And for me, I had come there maybe for similar reasons. A year out of undergraduate, I had worked in a conventional architecture practice in London, and I was wondering what else was out there. And when I learned about the Rural Studio, that really appealed on multiple levels. One was the opportunity for hands-on making. The other was a focus on community design and architecture for people who don't usually work with architects, and then of course just the adventure of a place far away. And the results of that year, I think there are multiple ways that it impacts me still, but one was as a 20-something-year-old, after a year there, I was in a position where the greatest opportunity I'd had was in rural Alabama as a young architect, as opposed to London or New York or San Francisco. And so this awareness that opportunities aren't always where you think they might be. And then the other aspect of it was the way in which the Rural Studio was questioning all the ways in which, in this case, students were learning and the places in which they were learning. So who their audience was, what the skills they were developing, where their studio was. And I think that has definitely influenced the way we think about how we position ourselves as practitioners now.
Given that you both talked about the Rural Studio, could you explain a little bit of what that is?
Sure.
Yeah, the Rural Studio is a design build program started at Auburn University approximately about 21 years ago. It would take architecture students out into West Alabama, and they would build. It started out as building kind of community projects and houses for underprivileged kind of individuals, and so really immersing the students into kind of designing and also building. So throughout the years the projects have grown in scale, and it takes on second-year students, it takes on thesis students who spend about 2 years out there. And during the time period that Lucy and I met, it took outreach students from other disciplines kind of across the nation, internationally, kind of invited them to apply to be an outreach student. So it's kind of the immersive laboratory, more or less. So.
Architecture camp.
Given this shared experience as a beginning, could you describe a project that you're currently working on or one you recently completed that you think builds on this?
I think what we'll try to introduce today is kind of all of the projects are somewhat building on this kind of idea. So I think we're kind of testing, the modes of practice in a lot of different ways. We're kind of playing designer, we're playing design builder, we're playing, visual artists or public artists, and then we're also playing advocate or we're playing the traditional architecture role in a sense. So I think hopefully we'll be able to kind of show how the projects that we're showing has shown how we're evolving in that.
And one of the things that we'll show are our public art projects, which was a particular venue that we found as a young practice and has continued to do so, to be a really great venue for all the things that we were interested in at the Rural Studio. So those are these small-scale projects that have more open-ended briefs than some of your more traditional architecture programs of a house or an office project or whatever. They are always opportunities for us to make and fabricate something ourselves. They're always an opportunity to bring something more experimental to the table, often in the way that we're working with and constructing materials. And then they usually have a really strong community component too, and sometimes that is up to us to define what that means, but it might be that we are working on a community garden, for example, is one that we'll talk about tonight, where as much of our work was in building the sort of social infrastructure of the garden as it was making beautiful fence and tool shed and all those aspects of it. We're working on one at the moment that's for a fire station in southeast Austin, and we're looking at how we can use discarded fire hose as part of that project, and also include students from the local high school in it. So we found them to be a really great venue to pull together those threads that definitely have their origins in how we worked in Alabama.
So my last question is, in fact, about the role of the architect and how, in many ways, you're beginning to redefine the agency of the architect today. And you've already begun to answer some of that, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. That's one of the things that drew me to your practice, was the way the typical role was being expanded in numerous ways. And so I'd be curious if you feel that that's a pressing need today, if there are other ways in which you're doing so.
I mean, I think kind of looking back, you know, when we were in, or at least I was in undergraduate school, there was a big emphasis on making or building or getting out of the studio, getting your hands dirty, kind of just do it, you know, all of these slogans, you know, like revolt, do something different, right? So I think, in a sense, that always encouraged us to think about what was presented to us prior, you know. So in a lens, I think we were kind of interested in what else is out there, you know, what else can the architecture profession kind of explore? Are you kind of going back and reclaiming some of the things that maybe architects used to do kind of holistically, that were then kind of compartmentalized down and became specialties? And, you know, what were the opportunities in kind of expanding your idea of practice? And also, how do you kind of generate opportunities, you know? And I think we're like given so many great kind of analytical skills and problem solving skills when we're in architecture schools to allow us to evaluate kind of situations and design problems, that I think when you can apply that across a lot of different kind of areas, and then, you know, projects emerge and you can kind of get your hands dirty and make a chair or make an umbrella or make a table.
Like this one, which you made, apparently.
Never say no. Yes. So I think, you know, it was always a question of like, God, if I could just build a project, was maybe something that was always going on in our head that really pushed us to just act, in a sense, you know.
I think also there's a discussion that architects across the board love to have, which is about how we're really underappreciated as a profession by the public at large, by developers, by politicians, by whoever. And I've certainly been part of that conversation in a lot of different venues, in school, in, you know, professional groups, just anecdotally amongst friends. There's always the problem is framed as, we could do more if only people understood how much we have to offer. And I think some of what we are trying to think about is not just what is the education that needs to happen so that other people understand what we do and can give us better opportunities or more opportunities, but to think about how we can wear different hats or put ourselves in different positions where we're not being super precious about we have to make only this thing, which is architecture with a capital A, that we might find some other ways that we can engage and expand the areas in which we design, which start to answer some of those questions about why isn't there more good design?
Yeah. I think that's an excellent answer, and given that we know there have been drops in the numbers of people becoming registered or even going into architecture schools, it's nice to hear the optimism that you both share. And
Yeah, absolutely.
no, really, and the perspective. So I'd like to thank Lucy Begg and Robert Gay of Thoughtbarn for being with us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
thank you so much to you
Yeah,
for having
thank
us
you.
here today.
Thank you.